The message arrived in old conclave formal dialect, a language Earth hadn't touched in 40 years, the kind they dusted off when they wanted you to understand this wasn't a conversation. Nora read it twice, set it down, and finished her meal. Dex waited until she pushed the plate aside. They're calling it a formal inquiry. That's the polite word for trial, she said. File it under things I saw coming. She had. 8 months of silence from the conclave after the convergence pulse had felt less like forgiveness and more like paperwork being assembled. For human civilian ships had detonated their drives into the face of a collapsing energy field, and 3 inhabited systems were still standing because of it. The conclave had a protocol for exactly that scenario. The protocol required 72 hours of authorization. The pulse had given them 6. Humanity hadn't waited. The conclave hadn't forgotten. The transport to Axis Station took 3 days. Nora used the time to read the charges Dex had pulled from the public record. For violations. The worst was unauthorized use of high-yield drives in a military-adjacent action. The proposed penalty was Containment Protocol 7. No human vessel permitted beyond the solar system for 200 years. She read each charge twice. She wasn't afraid of them. But you couldn't argue against something you hadn't fully memorized first. Axis Station came into view on the 3rd morning, a long spine of steel and pale blue light sitting at the center of 17 trade lanes, officially declared neutral ground. Nora had been here twice before. It had never felt neutral. It felt like walking into a decision that had already been made. The docking corridor was busy. She kept her pace steady and let the place press in around her. A pair of Thuan delegates moved past without acknowledgement. 3 Salvari technicians stopped talking as she walked by and picked it back up once she was 10 steps gone. Dex stayed at her shoulder and said nothing about any of it. A conclave clerk met them at the gate. Young, neat, clearly nervous. Envoy Vance. The council has convened. You're expected in the Grand Chamber at 2nd hour. What time is it? 1st hour, 42. 18 minutes. She found a water dispenser at the end of the corridor, drank slowly, and let Dex walk her through the chamber layout. 14 seats, he said. Aura's in the chair. Durek listed as advocate. Nora had dealt with Durek once, briefly. Thuan advocates were meticulous and liked their cases settled before the accused sat down. He'd have spent weeks on this. She had 18 minutes and 3 days of reading. LYSS, she asked. Dex checked. 3rd tier. Left side. She didn't reply to that. Filed it away. The Grand Chamber was designed to do one thing. Make whoever stood at the center feel outnumbered. 14 tiers rose in a full arc above the floor, and the accused stood at the bottom looking up at everyone who was about to decide something about them. Nora walked to the center and didn't look up. She looked straight across at the empty space in front of Aura's seat and waited. Aura arrived last. She always did. It was a positioning choice, not a scheduling one. Salvari, tall, silver-skinned, deliberate in every movement. She settled into the chair without looking at Nora. Envoy Nora Vance. Aura's voice was level and carried easily in the chamber's acoustics. You appear before this council as representative of the human species, in response to formal charges filed under Conclave Statute 9, subsections 3 through 7. You have been provided the record of violations in full. Do you acknowledge receipt? I do, Nora said. Do you understand the scope of this proceeding? I do. Aura let a pause sit there. Then you understand that the outcome may determine the future of humanity's standing in interstellar space. Nora looked up at her for the first time. I understand what you're saying, she said. I'm not sure you understand what you're starting. The chamber didn't react loudly. It didn't need to. A few delegates straightened in their seats. A ripple of translated murmurs moved through the tier headsets. Aura's expression held, but something behind it shifted, some quiet adjustment she hadn't wanted the room to catch. The room caught it anyway. Durek stood at the advocate's platform with his documents arranged and his arguments ready. The 14 species of the Galactic Conclave looked down from their tiers, and Nora Vance stood at the center of the bowl, alone, and looked right back up at all of them. The charges had been filed. The chamber was full. Somewhere behind her, Dex had taken a seat in the observer gallery and was already pulling records. Whatever the Conclave planned to do to humanity, it would have to get through her first. Durek had a voice built for courtrooms. Deep, even, no wasted breath. He spoke like the verdict had already been written and the trial was just the formal business of reading it out loud. He opened with the 4 charges and filled them in one at a time. The first, unauthorized use of high-yield drives. The 4 vessels that detonated their engines into the Convergence Pulse front were civilian colonization ships. Their drives were rated for colony transit, nothing else. Using them the way humanity did violated Conclave Statute 9, subsection 3, regardless of outcome. The second, action without council clearance. The 72-hour authorization window existed because 18 species had spent a decade negotiating it to prevent exactly this kind of unilateral decision in shared space. Humanity bypassed it entirely. No emergency waiver filed. No distress signal sent while waiting for clearance. They just acted. The third, interference with restricted sensor space. The debris field had damaged 3 conclave arrays in the Borel corridor. Array Station 12 had been offline for 6 weeks. The fourth, endangerment of civilian transit lanes. The Borel corridor was an active trade route. 11 vessels had been forced to reroute. 1 Polari freighter took hull damage before the crew received the emergency notification. Durek finished the list and let it settle before calling his first witness. 3 species testified over the following 2 hours. A Goran trade official who had been rerouted through the debris field and lost 2 cargo days. A Thuan Council observer who confirmed no emergency exception had been filed before the action was taken. A Salvari systems engineer who walked through the Array Station 12 damage in precise detail, cost estimates included. Nora listened to all of it without objecting. Dex was in the observer gallery. She could hear the quiet tap of his tablet every few minutes. None of the witnesses were wrong. The debris field had been a problem. The arrays had taken damage. The authorization window had been skipped. All true. 3 systems were also still populated. Durek hadn't brought that up, and Nora had decided to let him finish before she said anything. After the final witness stepped down, Durek turned to face the full council. The Conclave's protocols exist because order protects life, he said. When a species decides its own judgment overrides collective agreement, the framework that protects everyone breaks down. Earth acted outside the law. A good outcome doesn't change what the action was. He put the proposed sanction on the table. Containment Protocol 7. No human vessel beyond the solar system for 200 years. Several council members voiced support before he'd even sat back down. A Thuan delegate from the second tier said humanity had proven it couldn't be trusted in shared space. A Draenei representative said the precedent was dangerous. If Earth could act without clearance, any species could use that same argument. A Beryllian member said the 72-hour window existed for a reason, and a good outcome didn't retire that reason. Aura watched it all from the chair without speaking. She didn't need to. The room was going where she wanted. Then she looked at Nora. Envoy Vance, you have 30 minutes for a statement. 30 minutes. The Conclave's rules allowed for a full defense if the accused asked for one, but the request had to come inside the statement window. Use those 30 minutes for a statement, and the statement was her only shot. Nora stood. I won't be making a statement, she said. Something moved through the chamber. Not loudly. I'm requesting a full defense hearing. 7 days. Durek was on his feet before she finished. The charges are fully documented. There's no precedent for a 7-day delay in a statutory violation case. There's precedent for a full hearing in any case that may result in long-term restriction on a recognized species, Nora said. Article 4, Conclave Founding Charter. I'm invoking it. Aura's hands were flat on the surface of her bench. A full hearing would require. I know what it requires. Nora kept her voice steady. I'm also asking the Council to produce its own contingency plan for the Convergence Pulse scenario. Whatever response you had prepared that could have been executed inside the 72-hour authorization window. I'd like to see it. That changed something. Some of the movement in the chamber slowed. LYSS, in the third tier to Nora's left, had not said a word during the entire proceeding. She tapped her panel once. The founding charter is clear on this, LYSS said, addressing Aura directly. A full hearing is the envoy's right. Aura held still. The room waited. The Conclave will grant 48 hours, she said. Not 7 days. 48 hours from close of today's session. Durek sat down. His expression hadn't moved, but his hands were too still. Nora sat down too. 48 hours wasn't much. She'd worked with less. The lights in the auxiliary workspace dimmed to half power at 10th hour, and nobody noticed. They'd been at it for 5 hours straight, and nobody had looked at the time. Sienna had her results from the Conclave archive spread across 2 screens. Physicist by training, meticulous about it. She didn't put a fact down unless she could trace it to the source. Right now, she was working back through 7 emergency vote records from the last 3 centuries. All 7 confirmed, she said. All 7 were voted into inaction. The Conclave had the capacity to respond. They didn't. Dex had the names on his tablet. Nora looked at them for a long moment. 7 species. Some of those names didn't appear anywhere else in the database. No trade records, no diplomatic files, no survey logs. Just a name and a vote outcome, and then nothing after it. Like a sentence cut off mid-word. How many have living descendants? Nora asked. Sienna checked. 2. One has a small colony on a protected refuge world. One folded into the Polari population after losing their home system. I want both on record. She spent the rest of the night building the order of her defense. The witnesses, the documents, the question she planned to end on. One shot at the sequence. Move too fast, and the council would shut her down. Too slow, and the 48 hours would drain out. She got 2 hours of sleep in a chair. In the chamber the next morning, she started with the Polari Elder. Testimony by remote link, voice translated live. The Elder was old, deep into Polari's final stage of aging, skin pale and dry. She spoke quietly and without performance. 43 years ago, a plague hit 3 Polari colonies. Their medical systems couldn't produce a cure fast enough. Humanity had a synthesizer technology that would have worked, but it hadn't cleared Conclave cross-species medical distribution approval. Minimum 8 months for approval. The plague had a 14-week kill window. A human medical ship delivered the synthesizers anyway. Unlicensed. No approval. 18,000 Polari survived. I don't say this to talk about debt, the Elder said. I say it because it's true. When the timeline demanded action before the approval process could catch up, the action saved lives. Durek objected 3 times. Ora sustained all 3. The testimony had already been heard. The second piece came from the written record, the Brennan Corridor evacuation, 12 years back. Political deadlock had frozen the Conclave's emergency response to a failing station in the outer corridor. A human freighter captain, outside his flight charter, turned his ship around and pulled 12,000 Goran refugees off the station before the life systems failed. He filed the paperwork explaining himself afterward. He was also fined for the charter violation. Nora left that one hanging for a moment before moving on. Then she requested the 7 emergency vote records from the archive, the ones attached to the dead species list. Durek objected immediately. Ora looked at the request and hesitated. The records were public archive. She had no legal basis to block them. She allowed them. Nora walked through all 7. No commentary. Just the dates, the vote outcomes, the response capacity the Conclave had on hand at the time, and the result for each species. For the 2 with surviving populations, she noted the numbers before the crisis and the numbers now. The chamber got quieter with each entry. By the 4th, a Draenei delegate in the 5th tier was leaning forward, watching the display. At the 7th, Nora stopped and let the room sit with it. I want to ask the council one question, she said. On the record. Ora nodded. When the convergence pulse formed 8 months ago, confirmed 6-hour window, 3 inhabited systems directly in its path. What was the Conclave's response plan? The one that fit inside the 72-hour authorization framework. She looked up at the 14 tiers. I want to see it. Silence. Everyone in the chamber knew the answer. Nobody wanted to be the one to say it. Durek rose. The council's internal contingency planning isn't subject to disclosure during a statutory violation hearing. I'm not asking for classified documents, Nora said. I'm asking whether a plan existed. Yes or no. Ora said nothing. Durek said nothing. Nora turned slowly around the room. 43 years ago, humanity broke a rule and 18,000 Polari lived, she said. 8 months ago, humanity broke a rule and 3 systems survived. This council has a clean record of following its own procedures. 7 species that once sat in rooms like this one can't vote on what that record cost them. She sat down. LYSS hadn't moved in the 3rd tier. In the observer gallery, Roan, who had been there since the first session, had stopped writing. He was just watching. The clock was still running. But the room was different than it had been an hour ago. The closed session came without warning. Nora got the summons 12 minutes after the grand chamber cleared. Restricted meeting, Aura presiding, Durek present, 3 senior council members. No observers, no gallery. Door sealed before anyone started talking. She went. The room was smaller than the chamber and plain in comparison. Aura sat at the head of a flat table and waited for the door to seal before saying a word. "We've reviewed the proceedings," Aura said, "and the council has decided to change its position." Nora sat across from her and said nothing. "The charges under Statute 9 remain. However, given the nature of the violations and humanity's pattern of operating outside collective governance structures, the council is prepared to invoke civilizational review." Nora knew what that was. She made herself stay still. Civilizational review was old authority and used for over a century. Under it, the council could vote to mandate a forced reset of a species' entire spacefaring history. Not extinction, regression. Wipe the institutions, the technology base, the accumulated record of everything humanity had built since first contact, and push them back to the starting line to try again. Durek was watching her face while Aura said it, looking for something to land. He didn't find it. "That's a significant escalation," Nora said. "It's a legal one," Aura replied. "Given the pattern." "What pattern?" "Repeated unilateral action. Disregard for authorization frameworks. A culture that can't operate inside collective agreements." Nora looked at her steadily. "You're trying to close this before I finish." "We're trying to find a resolution," Aura said. "Withdraw the defense request. Accept a modified sanction, 50 years instead of 200, and the council drops the review." "No," Nora said. She stood, gave them the minimum politeness the protocol required, and walked out. Back in the workspace, she told Dex and Sienna what had just happened. Neither of them spoke right away. Then Dex turned back to his screen. He'd been in the Conclave's founding documents all day, not the modern reformatted versions, but the original archived text, digging for procedural precedents. Moving through layers of old diplomatic language that had been recatalogued so many times across centuries of conclave administration that parts of it had effectively gone invisible. He found it just before midnight. A single classification in the original founding records, written in first-generation conclave legal dialect. Reformatted too many times, it had drifted out of the searchable index and settled into a dead archive layer. It still existed. It had just stopped being findable. Humanity was listed as a protected emergent species. Dex read it 3 times. Then he called Nora over. The classification applied to species that had achieved interstellar contact within the first 100 years of the Conclave's formation. It couldn't be removed without a unanimous vote from all original founding species. And it came with one specific legal constraint. No punitive restriction on a protected emergent species was valid without unanimous consent from every founding member. 3 of those founding species were extinct. The unanimous vote was impossible. The consent could never be gathered. Every charge against humanity, containment protocol, civilizational review, all of it, had been legally invalid before it was ever filed. Nora sat with that for a while without speaking. "When do we use it?" Sienna asked. "Not yet," Nora said. "I want Aura to put the review motion on the floor formally. On the record. Then we pull this." Sienna nodded. Dex was already copying the document to 3 separate locations. Just before second hour, a quiet knock at the workspace door. LYSS was standing in the corridor alone. No staff. No message sent ahead. The Velini moved quietly. "I won't be long," she said. "But you should know what you're actually fighting." She came in. Over the next 40 minutes, LYSS told Nora what she'd been watching for 3 years. Aura had been steering the council, quietly, without stopping, delaying emergency response approvals for species the Salvari saw as economic competition, scheduling votes on contested matters during sessions when key dissenting members were absent, arranging testimony windows so the voices she didn't want heard ran last and got cut off when time ran out. 2 of the 7 species Nora had named in the chamber had filed formal emergency appeals. LYSS had found them buried in scheduling backlogs. They had never reached a vote. She wasn't saying any of this because she liked humanity. She was saying it because she'd been watching it for long enough, and Nora's defense was the first time in years she'd seen someone come close to pulling the whole thing apart. I have the vote records, LYSS said. I can make them available. Do it, Nora said. LYSS left without ceremony. Nora sat back down and looked at what she was holding. A legal document that killed every charge. And evidence of something that had been rotting inside the conclave for a long time. She'd come here to get humanity out of trouble. That wasn't the whole job anymore. Sienna heard it first. She'd been up since fifth hour, running projections she hadn't mentioned to anyone, modeling what a second convergence pulse would look like at closer range, using residual data from the first event. Running worst-case numbers was just how she thought. It kept her mind off things she couldn't control. The station alarm came through at 7th hour, 22 minutes before the grand chamber was supposed to reconvene. She was already standing when Dex opened the workspace door. It's a pulse, she said. They're calling it a micro-event, Dex said. Could stabilize. It won't. She turned her screen around. I've been modeling this for 2 hours. Contact with the station in approximately 6 hours. Give or take 20 minutes. Dex looked at the numbers. Then he went to find Nora. The grand chamber had already come apart by the time they got there. Aura was on her feet at the front. Several delegates were standing. Durek was in the side corridor talking fast to a conclave systems officer. The ordered quiet of the past 2 days was gone. Nora stood at the observer entrance and listened. Aura's plan was Evacuation Protocol 1. Orderly withdrawal. All personnel transferred to the standing fleet. Correct response. Done by the book. It took 3 days to run. The pulse was 6 hours out. We proceed with what's available, Aura said, talking over the objections rising from the floor. The station is a structure. Personnel are not. 900 beings were on Axis Station. Delegates, support staff, maintenance crews, archive workers, Roan with his physical records in the back room. Under an accelerated evacuation, the transports couldn't move that many people clear of the blast radius in 6 hours. Maybe 500 would make it. Probably fewer. Nora walked to the center of the floor. There's another way, she said. Aura looked at her like she'd stepped into a private conversation. Envoy Vance, this is not. The station's main power core runs on a Phase 4 reactor, Nora said. Same drive architecture as the colonization ships we detonated 8 months ago. A controlled overload, sequenced right, produces a disruption field large enough to break the pulse front at contact. We don't need 4 ships. We have 1 reactor. 1 shot. She looked at Sienna. Show them. Sienna stepped to the chamber display and put the model up. She walked through it in 3 minutes. Numbers, projected outcomes, the risk stated plainly. The risk, the core might not survive the overload. Station goes dark, possibly permanently. Major structural repair needed. 900 people would still be breathing. Aura went very still. I cannot authorize. I'm not asking you to, Nora said. I'm telling you what I'm doing. She left before Aura could respond. There were 2 human engineers in the station's maintenance crew. Rena and Call, both deep systems rated. She found them in the lower maintenance deck watching the pulse readings on a wall panel with the look of people who'd already run the evacuation math in their heads. I need both of you, Nora said. Neither of them asked for paperwork. The overload sequence had to be wired by hand. The station's automated systems would refuse an unauthorized command. The safety protocols wouldn't execute it. Every connection had to go in directly at the reactor housing, in a tight space, no margin for mistakes. For hours, Nora worked alongside Rena and Call 11 years since she'd done hands-on reactor work. She remembered enough to be useful. Dex ran the sequencing calculations from a hardline terminal 3 meters away. Sienna called adjustments down from the physics bay, 3 levels up as the pulse's approach angle kept shifting. LYSS arrived at the reactor housing 2 hours in, 3 Velini technical staff with her. She didn't explain herself. She picked up a tool, found a connector that needed holding, and worked. An hour after that, a Gorn engineer came down on his own. Then a Polari Systems tech who'd heard about the plan from someone in the corridor and decided she'd rather be doing something than waiting. With 30 minutes left, Nora sealed the housing and stepped back. On your count, she told Dex. He watched the approach readings. At 17 minutes to contact, he ran the sequence. The reactor groaned, deep and low, a sound that moved through the floor and into the walls. Every light on the station dimmed, then cut out entirely. Emergency strips snapped on in red along the corridors and floors. Then the vibration hit. Not a small one. The kind that made every bolt and panel in the place feel uncertain about its choices. It ran through the soles of Nora's boots, up through her legs, into her chest. Then it stopped. The alarm stopped too. The pulse readings on every monitor flatlined and held flat. Dex checked 3 separate sensor arrays before he said anything. Full dispersal, he said. It's gone. The reactor was still running. Reduced capacity, 2 cooling arrays offline, but running. In the corridor outside the housing, in the red emergency light, LYSS leaned against the wall and breathed out slowly. Rena sat down on the floor. Carl put his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Nora looked at all of them, human and alien, on the floor of a damaged station, nobody asking who gave permission, and let herself breathe properly for the first time in 6 hours. 900 people were still alive. The universe had made its argument. She just had to go present it to the council. The grand chamber smelled like scorched coolant. Half the lights were offline. The panels still running gave everything a flat, patchy glow. Repair crews worked the outer corridors with carts and cable rolls, and the sound came through the chamber doors in bursts. The session had been called anyway because Aura had called it, and when Aura called a session, it happened. Nora walked in and took her place at the center of the floor. She had a burn on her left forearm from a coolant valve that vented without warning during the reactor work. She hadn't changed her uniform. She didn't want to. Most of the council was present. A handful of seats were empty, delegates who had evacuated and not come back yet. The ones who remained looked like they hadn't slept. Aura spoke first. The conclave acknowledges the resolution of the convergence event. Axis station sustained damage. All personnel are accounted for. A pause. However, Envoy Vance disobeyed a direct order during a declared emergency. She used the station's core without authorization and placed 900 lives at risk. Nora waited until Aura was done. The core worked, she said. 900 people are still here. That is not the point. It's the only point. Aura's jaw tightened. The council is prepared to add yesterday's events to the existing charges. Aura. Nora's voice didn't rise. Before you file anything else, the council needs to see something. She nodded at Dex. He walked to the chamber display system and connected his terminal. This is from the Conclave Founding Archive, Nora said. Original text, unedited. Recovered from the base layer of the document system, below every reformatted version. It's existed since Charter Year 1. The classification appeared on the screen. Plain language. A list of species names with humanity among them, under a heading that read, Protected Emergent Species. Under the founding charter, Nora said, a protected emergent species can't be subjected to punitive restriction without unanimous consent from all original founding species. 3 of those species are extinct. The consent can't be obtained. The vote can never happen. She looked at Aura. Every charge you filed was legally invalid before you filed it. The containment protocol. The civilizational review threat. None of it was ever yours to impose. The chamber went quiet in a specific way. Not the thinking kind. The kind where everyone's already understood and is waiting to see who moves first. A voice from the observer gallery. The document is authentic. Roan, the old Goran historian who had sat in that gallery since the very first session without saying a word. After the reactor work, in the dark with only emergency power, he'd gone to the physical archive and checked the original printed text against the digital copy by hand. I can confirm the source and the integrity of the record, he said. It wasn't altered. It was buried deep enough that nobody went looking for it. Aura said nothing. There's a second matter, Nora said. Dex switched the display. The vote records LYSS had compiled over 3 years filled the screen. Dates, outcomes, scheduling patterns, 2 emergency appeals that had been routed into inactive queues and never heard. Together, they told a story each individual entry couldn't tell alone. LYSS spoke from the 3rd tier. I've been building this record for 37 months, she said. I can account for every entry. Key votes scheduled during absent quorums. Emergency appeals that should have reached this chamber and didn't. 2 of the 7 species Envoy Vance named in these proceedings filed formal petitions for emergency response. They were never heard. The Draenei delegate in the 5th tier stood. I moved to suspend the current chair pending a full review of these records. 3 other delegates backed it before he finished the sentence. Aura didn't protest. She sat very still and said nothing. Durek gathered his documents from the advocate's platform and left without being asked. The motion carried. 11-3. In the following hour, the charges against humanity were formally dropped. The civilizational review motion was struck from the record. LYSS was appointed temporary chair. Then Nora asked to speak one more time. "I'm not here to ask for anything else for humanity," she said. "What I'm about to propose is for everyone in this room." She'd worked out what to say during the reactor wiring. In the dark, burn on her arm, Dex counting down in her ear. She'd thought about the 7 names on that list. About appeals that went nowhere. About a 6-hour window that the entire conclave framework had no answer for. "The emergency protocols need a bypass clause," she said. "Any species operating inside a confirmed extinction window gets the legal right to act without prior authorization. Full review afterward. Consequences if the review finds fault. But not blocked before. Never blocked before." LYSS seconded before Nora had finished. It passed. 11-3. A monitoring seat on the Emergency Response Committee was established as part of the new clause. No veto. Just a voice in every crisis vote. The Council offered it to Earth. Nora accepted. She stayed after the session closed while the crews worked around her. Dex was somewhere down a maintenance corridor fixing a sparking panel he'd noticed on the way in. Sienna was in the corner explaining the overload sequence to a Valini physicist who kept asking the same question from slightly different angles and looked pleased every time he got the same answer back. The burn on Nora's arm was itching. She stood where the accused had stood 4 days ago, in the center of the damaged chamber, and looked at it. Uneven light. Scorched smell. A repair crew arguing above the east tier about cable routing. Humanity hadn't earned a seat here by being tidy or careful or deferential. They'd earned it because when the math failed and the protocol ran out of time, they were the ones who couldn't just stand there and call it a rule worth keeping. That wasn't going to change. The conclave was going to have to get used to it.